would you mind just pasting in the chat the YouTube channel that people can see this on once things are live? Great. Welcome, everyone. We'll start in about 2 minutes. Thanks, Meredith. So if anyone wants to send this to a colleague just to have on in the background, that's the YouTube link for the live stream. All right, welcome everyone. We'll start another minute or so. So Virginia, we have an open question here that I'll share a little bit about when I do my opening remarks, but the ability to see who else is in the webinar, we looked into this in terms of a tech feature. The only option that Zoom gives us for webinars is the number of attendees and not the specific names, but PSE has committed in their summary report that they do as a result of these to list everyone's names who joined. So I'm sorry, that is a tech limitation of Zoom webinar. We looked into a few other options. Okay, it's just 1 o'clock now. I'm sure a number of people have their noon meetings wrapping up, so we'll give them another moment or so. Welcome, welcome. We'll get started soon. Okay. Well, because these webinars are designed to be an hour to make them digestible, I say that we should get going. So welcome everyone to your October 16th webinar that's really focused on the biennial update of the 2021 Clean Energy Implementation Plan. My name is Sophie Glass. I'm an independent facilitator with Triangle Associates, and I'm going to help guide the conversation today. Next slide, please, Jack. So just the webinar format, it's a little different than Zoom meetings if you've been there, but the tools you all will use is the chat feature, is the way that us as hosts can send messages to you. Throughout this meeting, you'll get links, you'll get definitions, and it'll just be a chance for us to report out information. Raise hand during the public comment period. That is your time. Raise your hand, and everyone's going to have 1 2-minute opportunity to speak. So I'll get through you all, and PSE has committed that they'll stay. If there's more people, they'll get through the queue. The Q&A is really a questions and answers opportunity. We are going to collect the questions and answers throughout the presentation, and then after each presenter or each agenda item is done, we're going to pause for the Q&A. Some of the questions can't be answered on the spot, and that's where the feedback report comes in. So all the questions or comments will be noted. We know that it's more satisfying for you all to do it during the meeting, and so we'll try our best, and PSE will try its best. And so the last piece is, if you're someone who appreciates captions, you can click Show Captions, and then you can see that. Next slide, please, Jack. So just my request as your facilitator, just, be constructive and courteous. My job is to really guide the process. The purpose of these 1-hour webinars are to be more accessible to the general public, so explain those acronyms. The feedback form, and this will be the first of many times I'll ask you, Meredith, can you put the feedback form link in the chat, please? Is your chance to ask additional questions, additional input, etc. and then aim to focus on the webinar topic. There are a lot of things going on right now in the world of energy planning. PSE has a number of initiatives that it's has going on. There's things happening in the news related to energy that I know you're excited about. This was designed to really focus on the clean energy implementation plan. So try to focus on that. Anything additional, put in the feedback form, or really the Q&A, the public comment is your time to talk, and we can hear perhaps some off-topic remarks then. And so that's the public comments will occur after PSE is all done with its presentations. Next slide, please. So for those of you who are new to Puget Sound Energy meetings, they start all their meetings with a safety moment. And so this one has to do with food safety, about washing your hands when doing food prep, separate raw meats from other food, make sure you know what the right temperature is, refrigerate foods promptly, and report foodborne illnesses to healthcare providers. Our colleague is out with food poisoning today, and she doesn't sound like she's having any fun. So just some good safety moments there. Next slide, please, Jack. So today's speakers, primarily it'll be Brian Tyson, who's the manager of Clean Energy Planning and Implementation, and Kara Durbin, who's the director of Clean Energy Strategy. And for those of you who just joined, my name is Sophie Glass. I'm an independent neutral third-party facilitator from Triangle Associates. And Ray Outlaw, in addition, will wrap up the meeting with a few comments there. So next slide, please. Our agenda is going to be first turning to Kara and Brian to talk about the Clean Energy Implementation Plan status update, then focusing on the biennial update, and then specific actions that are part of the biennial update. The public engagement overview and next steps will actually be Ray Outlaw. I'll do the public comment. It can be more than 10 minutes if needed, and we'll adjourn. And then before we move on to the actual presentation, just making a comment that a number of you at the last meeting asked questions about the webinar format. We went through and tried to make some changes to the webinar platform as best as we could, given those limitations. So now you're able to see the number of attendees. We will, as facilitation staff and PSE, post the exact names of the participant in the meeting summary. So trying to do some workarounds. And with that, next slide. So Kara and Brian, I will turn it over to you, and we'll take a pause after you're done running through these first set of slides. All right. Can we see? There we go. Kara, go ahead.
Having trouble with my mute button. Can you hear me now, Sophie? Okay, sorry about that. I thought you could hear me, but apparently not. So if we can go to the next slide, I will kick things off with just a little bit of an overview of the Clean Energy Transformation Act. For some of you on the webinar, this is very familiar to you, all of this background. You've been a part of this conversation for a couple of years now. But for those of you who may be joining this conversation for the first time, I do want to provide a little bit of the background at the outset before we talk about the biennial update in particular. So Washington's Clean Energy Transformation Act was passed in 2019, and it would really set some really important clean energy milestones for not just PSE, but for all of the utilities in Washington State, to move away from coal beginning at the end of 2025, to reach a carbon neutral electric system by 2030, and to move towards a ambitious and important goal of 100% clean electricity by 2045. And wrapped into this important new clean energy law is the importance of equity, to ensure that as we make this clean energy transition, that all customers are benefiting from our transition to clean energy, that they're benefiting from the work that we do, and ideally we are reducing burdens, particularly to those vulnerable populations and highly impacted communities that we serve. That equity provision is really a core part of the statute, and you'll hear my colleague Brian talk a little bit more about the different tenets of energy justice, and this is a focus area for us. And this provision in CETA is really thinking about distributive energy justice. How do we distribute the benefits from this clean energy transition, particularly for those that have not really benefited maybe as much so in the past. So Jack, if you could go to the next slide. This slide also may be familiar to some of you. It really just captures our, at a high level, our approach to resource planning on the electric side. The journey begins with a long-range 20-year resource plan that the company develops and has been a part of our processes for many years now, really looking out into the future without the benefit of a crystal ball per se, but looking out and saying, okay, what do we think the energy needs look like over the next 20 years, and then what resources might be at a lowest reasonable cost to fill that need. So we've been developing an IRP for quite some time. Under the new clean energy law, we now have a 4-year clean energy implementation plan that we developed that is really a more narrower time frame, a 4-year slice, where we're looking at the specific programs, actions, and investments that are part of our clean energy plans. We developed our very first one under what is still a relatively new law at the end of 2021. So we filed that in December, and it was under review at the commission in a legal process for much of 2022, and we received a decision approving our plan with conditions in June earlier this year. And so our biennial update is reflecting many of the provisions and conditions that the commission gave us in that order, as well as making adjustments to our plan at that midway point. Jack, if you could go to the next slide, please. This slide just captures at a high level what our clean energy implementation plan sets out to do. It defines targets to achieve our clean electricity goals over that 4-year period. It identifies how all our customers will benefit through this work, with really a focus on what are called our highly impacted communities and vulnerable populations. We sometimes refer to both of those as named communities. And Brian will talk a little bit later specifically about our mapping efforts and work in this area. Our plan also proposes customer benefit indicators to shape our resource decisions and help us measure progress in different areas around equity over time. It lists our actions, programs, and investments, and our biennial update is part of that. It lists with a little bit more detail than before some of the actions and investments we've taken so far and the ones that we plan to take over the remaining 2 years of the 4-year period. As part of the plan, it's very important that we stay true to maintaining reliability and affordability for our customers. And you'll also see in the plan a real focus on public participation, describing how we've engaged customers in our efforts to design our plan, to hear feedback on how our programs and actions can benefit them. I think, Sophie, that might be it for this section. We'll go to the next slide and see. Might be a time to pause for, oh, nope, I do have one more slide. Sorry about that. So this is probably the most detailed one. Many are familiar with this, so I'll just cover it briefly. On the left-hand side, you have our captured our goals and targets from the 2021 plan, moving from approximately 35% renewable energy to 63% by the end of 2025. And then you see the goals I outlined earlier: carbon neutrality by 2030 and 100% clean by 2045. The middle section really talks about those customer benefit indicators that we've proposed and put in our plan that cover a number of areas, from public health to the environment to reducing costs, resiliency, and other non-energy benefits to be considered. And those are indicators that we have specific metrics for that we will track over time in this period and in future CEIP periods. And then finally, on the right, you just see at a high level that we plan to meet our clean energy goals through a mixture of utility scale renewables, so large scale renewables, as well as some distributed resources, rooftop solar being a primary example. We also have demand response programs that we are standing up, and we'll talk a little bit more about that target in a bit. And we have energy efficiency as an important part and longstanding part of our clean energy goals. So now I think I probably have actually wrapped this section, and we'll pause and see if there are any questions. I'm off again, Sophie. I apparently think that it's time when it's not. I did cover most of this. We filed our plan in 2021. It has been it was in a litigated process for 2022, and we received our decision in June. So we, at this point, we're here to really to focus the conversation around our biennial update, and I will pause there.
Yeah, you thought you had an easy job. No, you had a number of slides today. So thank you all for participating so well in the Q&A. There are a few that we answered in the Q&A itself, but in addition, there's some live questions we'd like to discuss. So first and foremost, Kara, we have a question that states, what energy resources are considered carbon neutral and clean energy, and what is the difference between the two of those?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have a number of clean energy resources that are part of our plan. There's some of the primary ones are wind, solar, and hydropower. And so we've had hydro as a part of our system for quite some time. We were an early leader in like our Wild Horse wind facility. And we're increasingly seeing our customers put solar as participate in our net metering program and put solar, say, on the roofs of their homes. And so those are areas that we are that are important parts of our plan from a clean energy perspective. When I refer to a carbon neutral standard in 2030, the law structures that to mean you need to be at least 80% renewable, and then the remaining up to 20% can be met through acquiring what are called renewable energy credits. So that isn't quite the same as delivering the clean power to customers, but it is purchasing an offset so that on balance, PSE can say our system is carbon neutral by achieving at least 80% in the renewable portfolio and being able to purchase offsets for the rest to get to a carbon neutral state in 2030. So I hope that helps.
Thank you so much, Kara. So then another question, Jack, if you could move back to slide 8. Perfect, there we go. So Jim Adcock is asking, CETA, which is the Clean Energy Transformation Act, I believe, law also requires that utilities be 80% carbon-free by 2030. Is Puget also committing to be 80% carbon-free by 2030, i.e. 80% of customer load being served by renewables and non-emitting sources of electricity?
Absolutely. Our commitment to the 80% standard has not changed. And it was a key part of our 2021 plan, and we still remain committed to meeting that.
Great. Thanks, Kara. So in terms of where the slides were posted, both in the meeting chat and in the Q&A, the link to the website should be posted. And otherwise, I think we've answered all the questions. So we can go, Jack, to the next slide, please. Okay. Brian, are you going to kick this one off, or is that Kara?
I think that's me.
Great. Go ahead, Brian. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. Happy to be here to talk more about the biennial update. As Kara mentioned, we had a long journey starting back in 2020 and 2021, and now finally doing this this update on our CEIP. First thing I'll note is that this is it's a refresh. So it's not a full CEIP. It's a refresh on a number of the items that we discussed in our CEIP the first go around. And so today I'd like to step through. Kara and I will step through some of the different parts of the biennial update that you'll see a refresh in, you'll see revisions in once we file later on in November. So if you could go to the first slide. So these are the different areas I'm going to touch on. As Kara mentioned, I'm going to touch on some of the equity, the 4 tenets of equity justice that we've been working on. I'm going to give an update on some of our definitions related to named communities. Also, we have a new definition, deepest need. I'll talk a little bit about how that came about and where we're at. We'll also have an update on some of the targets and goals that we have set for ourselves, as well as start to talk about some of the specific actions. We know that was a topic of conversation the last go around, and we have some specific products and programs we want to talk through and present to the group here. And then Ray is going to wrap it up on some of the public engagement that's in progress and in the future as well. So we go to the next slide. I'm going to start with equity. As Kara mentioned, this is one of those core tenets of CETA. And so what we've done is a number of things. The first is we did research. We went out there to figure out who was already sort of defining and thinking about equity. We have some guidance that came out from the Cascade rate order that really helped us break out these 4 quadrants that you see there in terms of recognition, justice, procedural, distributive, and restorative justice. And what we wanted to do then is say, how are the things we're doing in our CEIP correlated to each of these different buckets that you see here? So our biennial CEIP update will reflect this and show how we are moving forward, making progress in each of these different buckets that you see here. So recognition, I'll touch in a couple slides, I'll touch on how we recognize and how we define various communities, whether it be highly impacted, vulnerable populations, or deepest need, and also thinking about the disparities that may already exist within communities. We've done an analysis as well that will be in the report. When we think about procedural justice, we think about the number of touch points we've had across communities, across advisory groups, across customers. These are specific outreach opportunities that have happened either for specific products or programs or for the biennial as a whole. And we know that that will continue to be ongoing as we move through the CEIP period. And then we think about distributive justice. We think about those customer benefit indicators. If you recall, 2 or 3 years ago, we started to bring together customer benefit indicators and what do they look like and how should we measure them and what specific actions are they tied to. In the biennial update, you'll see some progress we made on including additional customer benefit indicators, additional metrics, and showing some of the data behind what we've seen in the previous 2 years as well. And then when we think about restorative justice, we think about how those 3, recognition, procedural, and distributive, really tie together and show that progress that we've made over the 2 years, and progress we'll continue to make moving forward as well. So you'll see a lot of that explained in the biennial update. And so I just wanted to present a little bit here. Can we go to the next slide? And I think we'll kick off some of the recognition justice pieces. And so really thinking about, first, let's recognize, let's identify communities that are experiencing disparities, experiencing burdens. Let's figure out what sort of mapping, in this case, is geographic mapping tools we can use to really understand who our customers are and where our customers are and located. And we talked about this in the 2021 CEIP because we know that's going to bring a lot of value in terms of education. It'll help us understand who do we talk to when we're trying to design a program that's specific for a named community. Now, since then, we've had a bit of a refresh. I believe the highly impacted communities has done a bit of a refresh. And then our vulnerable populations have had a tremendous refresh as well, both on some of the data we found and also by some of the conditions that we saw as well. So if we can go to the next slide, I really want to focus on vulnerable populations. When we first went through this, it was a number of the advisory groups, including the EAG, that helped really understand factors of vulnerability. In this go round, we received some direction and guidance from some of the conditions from the commission that really asked us to look at a number of additional factors. So we wanted to expand that list of factors that we have that really define vulnerable populations. But also along with that, we want to be sure that we're not duplicating factors, that the true intent behind the factors is not counted for multiple times. And so our team has gone through that process to really try to be leaner about the factors that we're using to define vulnerable populations. We've also updated some of the data sets that we've had. It's been 2 years, and we've had some time to look at various data sets that we can bring in, especially as it relates to some of these added factors that you see at the bottom here. Things like heat risk, housing quality, wildfire vulnerabilities. This really comes from some of the outreach, some of the dialogue we've had with advisory groups and with customers, that these are the things that are top of mind for a number of customers. And so when you see the vulnerable population mapping, it may be slightly different. There's been some changes in some of the census block groups as it relates to the level of vulnerability, but you will see an updated mapping in the biennial update, and you also see those various factors and what change over time there. Hey, if we can go to the next slide, one of the other pieces that we really need to work on, and this comes from the condition order as well, was defining deepest need. So this is a new endeavor and really was trying to get at the heart of understanding and seeing who and where customers are that are in a dire state. And so in this case, we had, again, conversations with some of our advisory groups and with customers to really understand, some interested parties to really understand what is meant here by deepest need, because this is a bit of a new term, and there's a number of terms that are out there, but this is a new term. And so we wanted to be sure that as we built this definition, that we had an understanding of what was really the intent behind this. And so what we found and what we heard is that there's a number of things that we should be looking at, both economic, so the dire state in terms of economic sense, but also there's some non-economic factors that we should be thinking about as well. So on the economic side, thinking about severe energy burden, which is, as we define, at the 10% level, so 10% of the annual household income is being devoted to energy bills. That's where we start with our mapping here. The other thing we heard is we want to understand where there are larger clusters, larger groups, a density, if you will, of customers who are experiencing an energy burden, a severe energy burden. And so we use some mapping tools to really understand where do we see large clusters of customers together who may be energy burdened. And we think that really helps us, because then we can sort of go into a neighborhood, go into a community, and understand some of those barriers that may be, some of those burdens that may be existing in that particular neighborhood. The other thing we wanted to do is, we also know we have customers spread out our entire service territory. So we want to understand customers that may be energy burdened, but not be within this density. We still want to capture those. And so that's why we use some of our we use the top 50% of our census block groups, where the count of energy burden customers is the highest. And so that then gives us an idea of, it may not be clustered in an urban area, but maybe in some of the rural areas, we may also capture severe energy burden customers as well. So then we have those two layers, and that gives us a map that you see here. Now, I want to go back to what I said earlier about some of the non-economic factors. So the non-economic factors, that's where we try to bring in things like housing quality or language or education, things like that. And you'll see that represented here by the gradient of the color that you see. So it goes from like a yellow to an orange to a red to a darker red. Once you get up to those various gradients, that's how we're reflecting the compounded nature of those various factors. So it's not just one factor, but really seeing how other factors, economic and non-economic factors, are building upon one another, which again really gets at some of our customers in the deepest need, who have these compounding factors, who are in this place of severity where it's not just economic, but these other things that are going on outside that are impacting the customers. And again, this is to help us understand the different barriers, the challenges that customers are having as we move through the CEIP period. Now, the final piece in this is bringing together some of what we did in the mapping, the quantitative, with what our teams, our community, our customer teams are doing out across our service territory to understand, is this look right? Does this make sense? Is this what we're hearing when we're out in the community, that this particular neighborhood, this particular group of customers are having really difficult time in terms of energy burden, or severe energy burden, I should say. And so again, it's not just the mapping, it's not just the quantitative, but also having that ground truth thing to go out into our service territory and talk to customers. And so that's the work that the team has been doing for a number of months now, really trying to be diligent about defining deepest need, because it is incredibly important and crucial to the work we're doing, but also want to be sure that it's also comprehensive. And so we know that we will continue to have discussions on defining deepest need as we move, not only once we file, but after we file, and continue into the next CEIP period as well. Okay, next slide. I know that was a lot, but I think this is my second to last one. But The other part of the condition really talks about a minimum designation. And in some of the groups and parties we talked to, it was thinking about energy benefits, a minimum designation for energy benefits focused on customers with the deepest need. Now, as I mentioned, we've spent a number of months and weeks trying to understand how do we define deepest need, because we believe that that is incredibly critical before we sort of think about a minimum designation. And so while we have, we think, a solid definition, we will continue to think about a number and what that looks like in terms of percentage. We will have one within the CEIP, the biennial update that comes out, but we want to be thoughtful about first the definition, and second about what's feasible, what's achievable, and within the next 2-year period. As I mentioned, this is a new endeavor. This is a new focus, and so we want to be sure that we understand some of the challenges that may exist in trying to develop a product for customers within the deepest need. Just like the definition of deepest need, we will continue to have conversations about this percentage, minimum designation, and what that looks like as we move forward into the next CEIP period as well. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Kara. She's going to talk a bit about some of the other revisions that we've made in terms of our goals and targets.
Great. Thank you, Brian. And then I think we've had a couple questions that we can address that perhaps relate to the targets after I cover this slide. Does that work for you, Sophie, Brian? Okay, just making sure I'm on track. So what I wanted to talk about next was some of the updates we're making through the biennial to our interim target for renewable energy. And so before I explain those, I really want to take an opportunity to talk about where we are today. And I think I will fold in a response to one of the questions in the chat because it feels like it fits here. So when we wrote our plan in 2021, we were sitting at approximately 34-35% renewable energy using our data from 2020. And we set a target for ourselves by the end of 2025 to be at about 63%. So we're now nearly 2 years into our plan, and we're still on track to nearly double the amount of renewable resources on our system by the end of 2025, which is really a great place for us to be. In terms of the question about where we sit today in 2023, we expect to be at about 53% by the end of 2023. We still have a couple more months left to go, but when we file our annual progress report in 2024, I would expect we would be at about 53%. So in terms of our plan, we're on track to meet or exceed 3 of the 4 annual interim goals that we set in our 2021 plan. And that includes the growth that we are anticipating we'll see on our electric system that has occurred since we wrote the original plan. We anticipate that we're going to deliver nearly 2.5 million more clean megawatt hours over the 4-year period. And that's really in large part because we have seen growth on our system, which I'll talk about a bit more. And we're still continuing to move as far as we can towards meeting the goals that we set out originally. For the biennial update, what we're proposing to change is adjust our target in the final year, 2025, from the 63% to 60%. And there are really a number of factors that are leading us to make this adjustment. As Brian mentioned earlier, this is our first biennial update, but the update is really an opportunity at this midpoint within the 4-year period for the utility to make adjustments to the plan in light of changes in circumstances. And so one of the reasons we're adjusting that target in 2025 is, the Clean Energy Transformation Act is about a percentage of load target. And so our loads have really grown significantly between what we thought they would be when we wrote our plan in 2020, 2021, and what we forecast our loads to be today. We're anticipating an increase in our electric loads, particularly when you look at the last year, 2025, to be about 7% higher than what we had planned for when we wrote the original plan. There are some other factors that are playing into our adjustment as well. We have some short-term hydropower contracts that we are benefiting from now that are expected and set to expire in 2024. We may be able to extend those, but we don't know yet. There are new resources that we are hoping to pursue through our all-source RFP process that may not be constructed and online in 2025 if we are to secure them. More likely timeframe is looking to be sometime in 2026. The good news is that if we do secure some of those resources, it will help us make progress in the next CEIP period. So as we look ahead to the 80% by 2030, those projects will benefit us. They just won't contribute in the year 2025 necessarily. And then another factor that is worth mentioning is that we plan our loads with certain assumptions about what level of generation will materialize. And what we're seeing over the past 2 years is that our hydro resources are trending lower than what we forecast, which means they're not contributing as much to those clean energy numbers as we would like. So those are just some of the reasons that are driving us to make this update. Again, we still feel like we're very much on track in terms of meeting our clean energy goals and being on track for 2030, and we'll be delivering significantly more clean energy over the 4-year period. And we'll still strive to meet 63% in 2025. It just really depends on the extent to which there are reasonable opportunities to acquire additional renewable resources between now and the end of 2025. So that's what I wanted to cover on this slide. Jack, if you go to the next slide, please. I will assume I have more slides because I probably do. Okay, great. This slide is more about some of the other specific targets in our plan. Related to the interim target discussion, we are proposing to adjust how we frame our renewable energy target as a 4-year average. And so that'll be something that you'll see in the plan. And that average, if you calculate it for the original plan, is 54.5%, taking an average of the 4 annual goals across the 4 years. And we are proposing to maintain that same average. In terms of some of our other targets, the energy efficiency target is being adjusted as well. Our energy efficiency target really comes directly from our biennial conservation plan, and the Clean Energy Transformation Act directs us to develop a 4-year target, but the biennial conservation plan is really based on a 2-year plan. And so in order to create a 4-year target, we had to estimate what the latter 2 years might look like. We used the first 2 years as a placeholder and said, we'll be adjusting it in the biennial. So that's how the target gets adjusted from the 536,717 that we put in the original plan to the number you see here. This is still a draft number. The biennial conservation plan is due the same day as the biennial update. So we're working closely with that team to make sure that we have the final number, but that reflects that change. Another target area is in the area of demand response. Our demand response target's going up significantly from the target that we filed. We filed at 23.7, and we're increasing that demand response target to 86 megawatts. We were directed in the Commission's order on our CEIP to adjust our target to reflect all cost-effective demand response resources that came in through our RFP. We were planning to do that anyway, so that's what you see reflected in the 86. And then finally, just to remind folks, we have 2 targets that relate to distributed energy resources, one for solar at 80 megawatts and one for storage at 25 megawatts. We're not anticipating making any changes to either of those targets, and you will learn more in the biennial about some of the programs and actions we plan to take to meet those. So I think there is one more slide. Jack, if you can turn to the next one, and that might wrap up my section. So this slide is really just covering at a high level some of the new clean energy resources that will be contributing towards our clean energy target over the 4-year period. Some of them are in the form of short-term resources, as I mentioned, and then we also have listed here the Clearwater Wind Project in Montana that began contributing to our portfolio this year in 2023, and the Vantage Wind Project in Eastern Washington is projected to be online sometime in 2025 and contributing to our portfolio as well. And so we'll continue to look for opportunities and pursue projects that help us meet not just the goals under this plan, but for our next CEIP, which will be here before we know it. So with that, I will, if you can go to the next slide, and it might be time to pause for questions.
It sure is. Thank you so much, Brian and Kara. There was a lot there. So just a feature of Zoom webinar is when the questions come in, only panelists can see them, but Meredith has been marking those as answered live so you can see them, but I know that causes confusion. But rest assured, we were going to go through and answer the questions actually live. So let's, you answered live already the question from Virginia, followed up by Don about the clean electricity. So we took care of that one. And then the next one is that we were going to answer live is about the load has increased significantly. Is this average load or peak demand? Brian or Kara, can you speak to that now, or should it be a feedback report?
What do you think, Brian?
I can
Do you
speak
want
to
to
it,
speak to it a little bit? Okay.
Yeah, so that load number, that should be an average annual load number that we use, that's been set sort of by the CETA requirement as well.
Thanks, Brian. So then another load related question, Virginia asked, why didn't PSE anticipate the increased load when the world was saying we needed to electrify everything? Brian or Kara, answer now, feedback report.
Yeah, I can give a little bit of context there, and we can probably add some more later. A number of the load growth came in after policy was enacted, you know, after we submitted that first CEIP as well. And so we think because of those policies, we saw a lot of EV load growth come in later. And I think Kara touched on this a little bit as well, as, you know, the load forecast back then had some impacts due to COVID. And so we saw some changes with customer behavior because we were using those COVID assumptions back then. And so that has changed as well. And so I think a number of those are really the two main factors that have sort of increased load that we otherwise would not have been able to predict in that setting before.
Great. Thanks, Brian. So then I think with the confusions of the setting, Don had a follow-up about demand and demand in the summer. Just Kara, forgive me for maybe not tracking carefully. Did you speak to the seasonality portion of Don's question?
No, I didn't really. And I think Brian touched on this earlier and just saying it wasn't really about peak demand so much as an annual demand number. Is that right, Brian?
That's correct. Yeah.
Very good. Okay, well, every other question according to my list has been answered live or in writing. We have one more here. It says, in the CEIP Clean Energy Implementation Plan, you are struggling to meet the 63% clean energy target you originally outlined for 2025. And some of the factors you listed seem like they are completely predictable. The slide mentions short-term hydroelectric contracts ending in 2024. You knew that these were ending, didn't you? And the effects on short-term contracts related to growing demand for CETA qualifying resources. Seems like you would have known this would happen and could have made conservative estimates accordingly. What are you doing to be sure to take these into account in the future rather than setting goals that don't reflect the realities that you can see ahead of time? Good question. And Kara and Brian, if you want to answer now, by all means. If not, we have that feedback report if you need to sit with an answer.
Yeah, thank you, Sophie. I'll touch on it a little bit. I mean, I think that this really is our first clean energy implementation plan and our first biennial update. So we are learning what to plan for and how to plan for the targets and actions we set out. So some of these things are certainly factors that will play a bigger role in our planning and our estimating as we work on future plans. I do think that we're getting accustomed to what is a percentage of load standard. That means as loads grow, the obligation grows. It isn't a chalk line that gets snapped when we file the plan. So we're very much on track to meet the plan that we set out when we wrote in 2021. And I think it will inform how we think about target setting in the future. Sophie, you're on mute.
Oh, okay. Whoops. All right. Still new at this game, I guess. So looking at the time, I know we have quite a bit more to cover, so I'll ask us to move along. So I think this is still the Kara and Brian show, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm going to continue on here. And now we're going to talk a bit more about specific actions. And this is one of the other core pieces of CETA is really talking about what specifically are we doing, what products, what programs, what are we setting up to move us closer towards those goals and targets in the 4-year period. I'll start with energy efficiency first, and a lot of the energy efficiency comes from our existing biennial conservation plan process. So a number of these programs are our existing programs, and what we want to highlight here are the programs that we're going to use to focus in on targeting named communities as we move forward the next few years. And so you see low-income weatherization, some of the multifamily retrofit, but these are programs where we believe we can target named communities over the next few years. I would say this is just a sample list. There's an extensive list of programs in the biennial conservation plan that'll come out in November 1st as well. So it's a busy day for us, but November 1st, that BCP will come out, and so you'll be able to see a bit more about those programs. I'll also say in our biennial update, we will intend to talk about these specific programs that are targeting named communities, the benefits and things like that, as we put that forth in November 1st as well. So be sure to check that out. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're turning to demand response. Demand response, very new for the company, and so we have 4 different programs that we are launching this year. One program has already had a couple events. But we've got some programs here listed, and really the intent is to either incentivize customers for shifting behavior or incentivize customers for enrolling a smart device like a thermostat or a water heater, things like that, or shifting customers' behavior just based on notifications that we may send out, things like that. And then that 4th program is really for our commercial customers and really focused on businesses receiving incentives for sort of a personalized energy reduction plan. Again, all 4 programs are about reducing energy usage. And so there's different ways and different mechanisms that we have in these different programs. So we're really excited to launch these 4 new demand response programs for the company. Next slide, please. So continuing on with our other distributed resources, I'm going to talk about storage first. So we've got 2 storage programs that we're going to launch in the coming years here. One is really a byproduct of an RFP, a request for proposal that we put together that we launched earlier this year. This is where PSE or developers have standalone batteries, and we will just offtake that energy during those peak period times. But we also have a residential battery program that we're launching that really incentivizes customers to install batteries within their home, kind of removing some of that upfront cost. And we think our goal is 5 megawatts by the end of 2025. We think that's about 2,500 customers that could participate in this program alone. And so another really exciting program that we're getting launched in the next couple years. Okay, and then finally, if we go to the next slide, for our distributed solar program. So you see a long list here. Some of these you all may be familiar with and have seen, and some of these are new. And so at the top, you'll see 3-4 programs that are existing. You think about our community solar, our green power solar grant program, our net metering program. All of these different programs, we believe, are helping build towards that sub-target of 80 megawatts by the end of 2025. Community solar, that's where customers have an opportunity to subscribe to shares. There's also an income eligible portion of community solar as well. We're looking to increase that over time as well. As some of you may know, that one of the conditions in the order was to target 50 megawatts of community solar by 2025. And so the team is moving diligently to acquire those projects in that time frame. I do want to point out the bottom 2 programs as some of our new programs: solar purchase rate and residential rent to own. On the solar purchase rate, customers again can own some of that distributed solar capacity over the next couple of years. And then with the residential rent to own, this is a bit of solar and storage component as well, but basically a rent to own option for residential rooftop solar and batteries. And so we think both of those programs, there will be opportunities to really target named communities to, again, going back to that distribution, that equitable distribution of benefits. We believe these are the type of programs that are going to help do that. I'll wrap up on one more slide. These are some other actions that we're taking, really focus on how do we develop the right infrastructure, whether it be a technology or some of the grid modernization out in across our service territory. So we'll talk a lot about the virtual power plant, that we've installed and initiated over the past 2 years. And so you'll see us talk more about that later. We also have a time varying rates pilot that's ongoing right now. And again, with that focus on named communities as well for enrolling customers, and then a number of grid modernization enhancement that are happening across our service territory as well, because we know that these are the things that are really going to help us, that are really underlining and providing that foundation for moving towards a future of more distributed resources as well. Okay, I believe that's it before we get to public engagement. Yes.
Great. So we have a few questions and answers here. So one has to do with the Flex program. And so that program, Jim, PSE staff is going to add this to the feedback report because they need to circle back with a few of their colleagues. And then the other questions from Don Marsh is interested in the residential battery owners having incentives to participate in load shifting and a time varying rates program. The last I heard, there were obstacles. I don't know, Brian, Ray, or Kara, do you have any updates, or is this also a feedback? Another feedback report item.
Yes, I would say so. Yeah.
Brian, we'll get back to Don with that one.
Yep, exactly. Yep, we'll do that, Don. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, very good. So I'm going to turn it over to Ray just to ensure that within the hour we can start the public comments. So go ahead, Ray.
Thanks, Sophie. And just flagging, there's one more new comment, a new question in the Q&A.
Ray, would you mind starting with that one? So let's I'm sorry. Just if we want to go back, Jack, to slide 27.
And Brian or Kara, you see it. So it says, help me understand what is actually planning and what's changing, what happened with net metering, for example.
Yes, thank you for that, Virginia. So net metering, there is a certain threshold that PSE believes it will meet. This is by rule. Once you meet a certain threshold, we can establish a new program. And so we are thinking ahead of, we're going to meet that threshold. So now we're thinking of the sort of 2.0 version of net metering. What does it mean to expand that net metering program within itself? So that's really the key part in that net metering program that you see there. The other thing, was there another piece? So the other items there, Virginia, so like I mentioned, some of these programs and products are existing. And so we'll just talk more about what we believe that growth is going to look like for those existing programs. And then the couple on the bottom there, the three on the bottom, I should say, are new programs. And so in the biennial update, we'll talk more about what that program is, what are the benefits that we believe we'll see, and what's ahead, what future work needs to be done to stand up those programs.
Great. So I thank you for Brian. How about Ray, you continue, and then we see another question, open question. Let's come back to that at the end, just so that Ray, you can get through your slides. So we see one open question. Go ahead. Thanks,
Sophie. Okay, so next slide, please. And what you'll see on the slide is just a snapshot of the engagement we have done for the biennial update. So when you see the biennial update itself, there'll be a fairly substantial chapter on engagement. And it will include a lot more than this because PSE has done a lot of engagement in other spaces. These numbers just reflect the work we've done specifically for the biennial. So 7 conversations with the Equity Advisory Group, a couple each independently and then as a group with conservation resource and low income, and then 20 community-based organization interviews and an online survey that is wrapping up today with now approaching 3,000 responses. We got another big batch of responses over the weekend. And again, it's just intended to give you a snapshot of the work that we've done to date and what you'll see in the biennial. And then on the next slide is a summary of kind of key lessons learned. And I want to flag the key part. This is not everything we've learned by any means, but we wanted to share a little bit of what we've been hearing as we talk to customers, as we talk to people within and around named communities. First and foremost, basic needs need to come first before engaging on clean energy. That's a story we hear over and over and over again. We're seeing that clean energy knowledge is really varied across communities. There is interest in learning more about clean energy in a lot of spaces, but it's also highly varied. And people see the clean energy transition as both a risk and an opportunity. You know, the idea of clean energy is very promising for people, but they also see the risk associated with costs and additional infrastructure. In a lot of communities, reliability and resiliency are key concerns. They see clean energy as a way to address some of those concerns, but also it is a priority for them above and related to that basic needs concept. And then the last thing we'll note is just that engaging with community organizations and leaders has been extremely valuable, extremely important. We see them as the partners and messengers that they are, but they are also extremely resource constrained. So we've had to be thoughtful about which topics to engage with and when to address some of those challenges with resource constraints, excuse me. Okay, next slide. So this is our last kind of content slide. So what happens next? And then I think, Sophie, you might have that question to go back to. As Brian and Kara pointed out, November 1st, we have a submittal for the biennial. The commission will host a public comment period after that submittal. And then there's a formal commission review and approval process. As Kara mentioned, this is our first biennial update. It'll be the first one for the commission to review for us, so we don't have a lot of insight of what that looks like. But it will mirror likely the 2021 CEIP. And then beyond this update, we're going to continue to address the commission orders that Brian mentioned, continue to work on clean energy resource acquisition and refining and developing new programs. You'll see quite a bit of write-up in the biennial about the work that we did to refine and develop new programs. So that kind of work will continue. And we'll continue to advance our equity efforts, including working with the Equity Advisory Group. And it will not be very long before we're turning the page on this document and started to work on the 2025 CEIP.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Thanks, Sophie.
Yeah, thank you. So with the final question, my understanding is, and I'll read the question, is that PSE needs to connect with other coworkers and it'll be in the feedback report. But the question itself is, with the growing load, growing share of renewables, intermittent in the energy mix and decreasing use of thermal generation, is there a plan to incorporate utility scale capacity resources like battery storage? So we've noted this for the feedback report, and thank you for your patience with the answer. We are going to turn our attention to, and there's one more question here, and I'd say let's answer it and then we'll turn to public comments. It's, can you elaborate on the actual potential conflicts between meeting basic needs and engaging with clean energy for named communities?
Sophie, I'll try to do that quick, but it's actually kind of a long answer. We talked, one of the community-based organization types that we talked a lot to were food banks. And when we're having a conversation with them about what does deepest need look like to them, the answers were often, you know, customers who are on the edge of homelessness certainly meet that criteria for deepest need. And customers that are in that space, the idea of a conversation about solar panels or batteries or anything that might require out-of-pocket expenses is a challenge. Like they need immediate assistance in ways that are unrelated potentially to clean energy. So I think that's just an example of the kind of challenge that we face when we dig deeper into deepest need and work on addressing how we reach that particular segment of customers.
Great, thank you. Let's shift into public comment here. I have my cheesy timer, but how these webinar public comment periods are working is I'll go in the order at which I see hands come in, and every person gets 1 2-minute opportunity to speak, and PSE is prepared to stay beyond the 2 o'clock hour. So let me look at the hand raised. I see, go to the top of my list, I see Don Marsh and then Jim Adcock. So Don, let's get you all situated. Can I have Pauline promote Don and allow him to speak? Go ahead, Don.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. So I have 2 questions. So I don't think my questions about the energy burdened communities was promoted to the general questions that were recognized in the log there. So I was looking for a more detailed map, and I was told that you don't have or PSE does not have an interactive map to share, and that's fine. We could just take a spreadsheet that just has census block numbers and the score. So I do hope that PSE will provide that during the comment feedback time. My other comment is that I appreciated this slide 30 that was talking about PSE's efforts for public engagement, but many of us feel like this is going actually in the wrong direction. So now various environmental groups, including Sierra Club, Washington Clean Energy Coalition, Third Act Puget Sound, Union of Concerned Scientists, are all not being allowed to participate in the Resource Planning Advisory Group. And this forum is too short for us to actually engage in the topics that we think are important, especially, restricting so many environmental groups from participating is really not wise at a time when you're undertaking clean energy plans. Environmental groups may have some good suggestions or good feedback, and we can't provide it in 2 minutes here. I'm just even telling you about the problem has taken almost my whole 2 minutes. So there's a lot of other things that I would like to comment on, but I see that I'm down to 8 seconds. So I'll take that as a problem with the process now. We're not getting public participation at the level we should.
Goodness. Thank you, Don, for those comments. Meredith, can I ask you to put another link to the feedback form? And as the process person, I hear what you're saying, and more information will come out in the coming weeks. And so thank you. And then next, I think we had Jim was next up. Pauline, can you promote Jim to be able to speak?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, first of all, I want to give a shout out to Brian Tyson's presentation on vulnerable populations. I think that's heading in the right direction, including the coverage of heat waves and fires. My aunt died in a Seattle heat wave, so it's very real to me. Moving on to the next subject, Puget talked about courtesy. Courtesy is a two-way street. Puget is being extremely discourteous to long-term stakeholders, some of which have invested more than a decade in the Puget IRP process. The role of such stakeholders is vetting, quote unquote, asking the tough questions which Puget does not want asked. For example, one woman kept Shell City Light out of the billion-dollar whoops nuclear catastrophe. By refusing such vetting questions, that goes to the integrity of Puget's process. I suggest that Puget should continue to allow the traditional stakeholders to fully participate. This is the meaning in the IRP law of public participation. Instead, Puget sends out an email to everybody saying, you are not allowed to participate. Thank you for listening to my position.
Thank you, Jim, for sharing those comments. And again, as the process person, I'm thinking about them, and I know PSE is as well. I'm going to just see here, we have one more hand raised from Virginia. Pauline, can you promote Virginia to be able to speak?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, great, go ahead.
Great. Well, I just want to second what both Don Marsh and James Adcock had said about meaningful participation from the public, and that is not what I feel we are getting. I feel that PSE is choosing to only listen from insiders. And yes, that's how PSE, that used to have a different name, got in trouble with whoops that we're still paying for. So it's just really, to me, very upsetting that PSE seems to be going backwards from public participation, which in the last couple of years wasn't great, but it was way better than it used to be. And it appears that with your current situation of, once again, requiring people to apply to participate, send in some kind of resume, saying that disadvantaged communities should be considered, but the only thing you want to know about is whether they think like you guys do. So I'm sorry to say it so bluntly, but it is something that I'm just really disappointed to see. And it doesn't sound as though what either Dawn or James said has really had that much of an impact. But I do appreciate the changes from the last meeting in terms of making things more available with this system. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Virginia. These are your 2 minutes, so you can be as blunt or not blunt as you'd like. So I'm looking at my list here. I see another hand raised from Jennifer Keller. So let's just reset. Can you promote Jennifer, Pauline?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having this meeting. And when you say you looked into, if you do a webinar, this is the limitation and so on and so forth. So many of us have held Zoom meetings, and we know that you have a choice between whether to hold it as a webinar format or a Zoom meeting format. And so it doesn't answer the question to say, oh, you know, we're holding it as a webinar format. Sorry, it won't let you do all these things. When you have the option to hold it as a meeting, especially there were 30 some people here today, this is not going to make it unwieldy to try to hold some kind of actual Zoom meeting rather than a webinar, which a webinar is meant to present information. It's not really meant to create a place where there can be a sense of the community that is there talking together. So I just wanted to say that that it doesn't answer the question for me when you say, oh, we're holding it as a webinar. That's your choice, but you do have other choices. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Jennifer, about talking about platforms and choices and all the matter. Let me go back to my participant list here. I see Jim's hand was up again, but the guidelines that we have for these meetings is each person speaks once for their full 2 minutes. And Jennifer, you spoke already. So I think with that, I'm not seeing any additional hands. I'll pause for a moment just to confirm. Okay. Very good. Well, thank you to the participants who hung on for an extra few minutes here. We'll get our timing down to really just stick to that hour that PSE was aiming for. Thank you to the participants who are exploring this new format and method with PSE, and thank you to the presenters for sharing a lot of good information. There are a few questions that were flagged for a feedback report, so that will go into the mix, as well as there's a commitment to provide, you know, a summary of the questions and answers, as well as the participant list that will come out in the near future here. So thank you all so very much, and we hope to see you at the next webinar. Take care, everyone.